A massive bomb was dropped on all of us during the wake. My grandfather apparently had a 4-year-old son, and my entire family despises him.
Hello, I'm Truly and welcome to my channel. Thank you for listening and I am curious. Where and what time are you hearing this story? Please, let me know where you are hearing this in the comments below. Lastly, for more stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
The stale perfume of lilies and old grief hung heavy in the air of my grandfather's wake, a suffocating blanket woven with whispers and the clinking of china. My name is Mario. I'm a stay-at-home computer programmer, which usually means my life is a quiet hum of code and caffeine. Not today. Today, it was the discordant clang of a gong dropped squarely on a room full of brittle nerves. Grandpa Elias, a man whose presence was as solid and unyielding as the oak desk in his study, was gone. And in his absence, the fragile structure of our family was already beginning to fracture. The usual suspects were here, circling each other with practiced politeness that barely masked years of simmering resentment. My father, Uncle Thomas, Aunt Eleanor, Grandpa's 3 official children, paced like caged lions, each glance at the mahogany casket a calculation of inheritance, a silent battle for the biggest slice of the Elias pie. They'd always been jealous of Dad, the golden boy, the one Grandpa favored, even if Dad never truly capitalized on it. Now the collective family jealousy, a thick, palpable thing, was about to find a new target. I stood by the window, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in my hand, observing the spectacle. Family gatherings were never my scene. I preferred the logic of algorithms to the chaos of human emotion. But even I, with my programmer's detachment, could feel the tremor in the ground just before the earthquake. Then she walked in. She wasn't alone. Mildred, a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, her face pale but resolute, and beside her, clutching her hand, was a boy. Small, silent, and utterly alone in a way that pulled at something deep inside me, even before I knew his story. He was perhaps 4 years old, with eyes that seemed too old for his face, taking in the grand somber room with a quiet curiosity. His hair, a surprisingly rich shade of auburn, caught the dim light, and a jolt went through me. It was the exact shade of Grandpa Elias's hair, before it had silvered. A hush fell. Not the respectful silence of mourning, but the abrupt, stunned quiet of a group of predators sensing something new and vulnerable in their midst. Mildred ignored the stares, her gaze scanning the room until it landed on my father, Thomas, and Eleanor. She walked directly towards them, pulling the small boy gently along. My father, who usually puffed out his chest and held court, seemed to deflate. Uncle Thomas's jaw tightened. Aunt Eleanor's perfectly made-up face contorted, a mask of confused displeasure. "Mildred?" my father finally managed, his voice a strained whisper. "What are you doing here? And who is this?" Mildred's voice, when it came, was soft but clear, carrying easily across the suddenly silent room. "I'm here for Elias. And this," she said, her hand resting on the boy's head, "this is Henry. He's Elias's son." The bomb. It landed not with a bang, but with a sickening thud that vibrated through every bone in my body. The air crackled with disbelief. A collective gasp rippled through the room. 4 years old. Elias's son. A 4-year-old son. I, Mario, Henry's nephew, felt a bizarre mix of shock and a strange, almost cinematic fascination. My grandfather, the stoic, the proper, the man who'd preached family values and upheld tradition like it was written in stone, had a secret child. With Mildred. Mildred, the young neighbor from 2 streets over, who used to come over and help around the house with gardening and odd jobs during her college summers. I remembered her. Quiet. Respectful. Always with a book. The family had dismissed her as little more than hired help. Now, she was standing here, holding the hand of Grandpa's apparent love child. "What in God's name are you talking about, Mildred?" Aunt Eleanor shrieked, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a cleaver. "Elias had no other children. We are his children." Mildred didn't flinch. Her grip on Henry's hand tightened slightly. Henry, for his part, remained utterly still, his gaze fixed on a spot somewhere behind my father's head, as if he were observing a very boring play from a very long distance. He truly was small, silent, and all by himself, even with his mother beside him. "He is Elias's son. Henry Elias Thorne," Mildred stated, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "He was born 4 years ago, on March 12th. Elias was there. He funded everything discreetly. He wanted to keep Henry a secret until Henry was older, or until this day." Her eyes briefly flickered to the casket. My father's face was a mask of furious purple. Discreetly? You mean he kept it a secret from his actual family? From us? He asked me to, Mildred said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. Grandpa Elias was a man who commanded loyalty, often through quiet manipulation and the promise of future reward. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. Grandpa's increasingly vague excuses for his whereabouts. His sudden, uncharacteristic absences. Our family had always been focused on the main estate, the official family legacy. We hadn't looked beyond the meticulously maintained facade. Uncle Thomas, ever the pragmatist, narrowed his eyes. Do you have proof, Mildred? Birth certificates, DNA, anything beyond your word? Of course, Mildred said, reaching into a small handbag and producing an envelope. From it she pulled out a pristine birth certificate, a copy of Elias's last will and testament, newly amended it seemed, and a small sealed plastic bag containing what looked suspiciously like a lab result. Henry's name. Elias Thorne is listed as the father. His will, updated 2 months ago, acknowledges Henry. And yes, she added, holding up the lab result, I anticipated your skepticism. This is a DNA test comparing Henry's sample with one of Elias's known samples, taken from an old hairbrush he donated to charity last year. 99.99% certainty. The room erupted. The calm that had settled was shattered by a cacophony of outraged exclamations. My father slammed his hand on the arm of a nearby armchair. Aunt Eleanor let out a strangled cry and buried her face in her hands. Uncle Thomas snatched the papers from Mildred's hand, his eyes scanning them, his face paling with each word. The jealousy that had always clung to my father now shifted, a predatory gaze falling squarely on the small, silent boy, a 4-year-old boy who, by law, was as much an heir as any of them. Perhaps even more so, given the timing of the updated will. This is an outrage, Aunt Eleanor wailed, lifting her head, mascara streaking her cheeks. A gold digger. Elias would never. He was tricked. Mildred's gaze hardened. He was not tricked. He loved Henry. He visited him every week. He taught him to read, to play chess, even at 4 years old. He built him a treehouse in a garden no one here knew about. The sheer audacity of it all. Grandpa Elias, leading a double life. And Mildred, the quiet neighbor, living it with him. The family's previous ignorance of her whereabouts, her true relationship, had been absolute. They saw what they wanted to see, a helpful, unassuming young woman. Not the confidant. The lover, the mother of a secret child. I found my feet moving, drawn by an unexplainable pull towards Henry. He hadn't made a sound. He hadn't cried. He hadn't even looked up at the shouting. He was a tiny island of calm in a storm of adult fury. This was Henry, my half-uncle, the latest, most unexpected branch on our tangled family tree. As I approached, I knelt down, trying to meet his gaze. Hey Henry, I said softly, my voice barely audible above the din. His eyes, those ancient insightful eyes, finally turned to me. They were the color of warm honey, just like Grandpa Elias's. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just looked. It was disarming. Mario, what are you doing? My father snapped, but I ignored him. I'm Mario, I repeated, a small, awkward smile on my face. I'm your nephew. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. A 30-year-old man calling a 4-year-old his uncle. Henry tilted his head, a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition? Curiosity? Or just the quiet processing of a child absorbing too much, too fast? He didn't offer his hand. He didn't speak. He just gripped Mildred's hand tighter. Mildred, sensing my quiet approach, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement. She hadn't come here for a fight, not truly. She had come here for Henry. To establish his place. This is a lie, a complete fabrication. Uncle Thomas roared, waving the will in the air. He can't just rewrite his will to include some charity case. We'll contest this, every penny. The lawyers, who had been standing discreetly by the door, now stepped forward, their faces impassive. Mr. Elias Thorne's last will and testament appears to be legally sound, one of them said, his voice calm, cutting through the hysteria. It was signed and witnessed by ourselves, and by an independent notary. The acknowledgement of young Henry as his son is clear, and his provision for him significant. Significant. The word hung in the air, weighted with implications. My father's face went from purple to ashen. Aunt Eleanor sank onto a velvet chair, looking utterly defeated. The collective jealousy, previously a low hum, now roared like a firestorm. This isn't just about a secret, it's about control, legacy, and money. I looked at Henry again. He wasn't a gold digger. He was a child. A very small, very quiet child, who had just had his existence publicly unveiled. Not with a birthday celebration, but at his father's wake. He was the living embodiment of Grandpa Elias's final, most stunning secret. "He has the same eyes," I heard my Aunt Eleanor whisper, almost to herself, staring at Henry. "The same, stubborn set to his mouth." The denial was crumbling, replaced by a devastating, undeniable truth. The wake, which had begun as a formality, a ritual of closure and inheritance negotiation, became a crucible. The family, already fractured, was now splintering into smaller, sharper pieces. Mildred stood firm, a quiet sentinel guarding her son. She wasn't the young neighbor anymore. She was Henry's mother, armed with truth and legal documents. Henry, oblivious to the furious financial calculations churning in the minds of his half-aunts and uncles, simply leaned against Mildred's leg. He was small, silent, and all by himself in the chaos. But no longer truly alone. He had Mildred. And somehow, in that moment, I felt a strange pull to him. A small, silent boy, the unexpected inheritor of a grand, complicated legacy, and the living ghost of a life my grandfather had kept hidden. The bomb had indeed dropped, and the shrapnel would be flying for years to come. I, the quiet programmer, found myself inexplicably drawn into the real-life drama, wondering what role I, Henry's newly discovered nephew, might play in the aftermath. The wake for Grandpa Elias was over. The wake for our family, however, had just begun. The clink of ice in half-empty glasses was the loudest sound in the Thorne living room. Grandpa Elias's wake had tapered off, the last of the distant relatives and well-meaning friends finally gone, leaving only the immediate family to navigate the heavy silence left in their patriarch's absence. And in the wake of the even heavier revelation that had dropped like a bomb right there, between the eulogy and the stale coffee, I settled on the worn chaise lounge, feeling the ghost of Grandpa Elias's usual indentation next to me. My father, Danny, was hunched over the mantelpiece, tracing the outline of a framed photograph of Grandpa Elias, his face a mask of weary disbelief. Uncle Thomas, ever the pragmatic one, was on the phone in the kitchen, his voice a low, urgent murmur, probably already dealing with the legal fallout. Aunt Eleanor, usually the family's emotional rock, was sitting utterly still on the sofa opposite me, her hands clasped tightly, staring blankly at the fading sunlight filtering through the lace curtains. And then there was Henry. He was 4 years old, with a shock of sandy blonde hair, and eyes the exact shade of Grandpa Elias's own, a startling blue that seemed to hold a wisdom far beyond his years. He was currently perched on Mildred's lap. Mildred, the woman none of us had ever met until 2 days ago, a quiet, unassuming woman whose soft voice had delivered the earth-shattering news. Henry was coloring in a dinosaur book, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath our feet. It was still hard to process. Grandpa Elias, my grandfather, the man who taught me to fish, to tie a proper knot, to appreciate the quiet wisdom of a sunrise, the man who had always been the epitome of steadfast, predictable, patriarchal strength. He had a son, a 4-year-old son. And not one of us, not my father, nor Uncle Thomas, nor Aunt Eleanor, had known. The initial shock had been a physical blow. Danny had gone pale, almost collapsing into a chair. Eleanor had gasped, a small, wounded sound. And Thomas had slammed his hand on the table, muttering something unintelligible. The funeral director, a man named Mr. Henderson, whom Grandpa Elias had known for decades, had cleared his throat awkwardly and excused himself, leaving us to our raw, exposed grief and utter bewilderment. Mildred had stood there, clutching Henry's hand, her face a mixture of apprehension and quiet resolve. She wasn't confrontational, not accusatory. She was simply stating a fact. Elias was Henry's father, she'd said, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of the air conditioning. He asked me to wait until the time was right. To tell you all, the time was right had apparently meant after his death. It felt like a cruel joke, a final bewildering twist in Grandpa Elias's long storied life. But then, as the initial anger and confusion began to subside, replaced by a dull ache of sorrow and a strange sense of obligation, something shifted. Maybe it was Henry's innocent blue eyes, so undeniably Elias's. Maybe it was Mildred's quiet dignity, her lack of demands, her almost apologetic demeanor. Whatever it was, the family, in its own fractured, grief-stricken way, had accepted him. Not without pain, not without questions that would echo for years, but with a surprising melancholic embrace. "Mario," Aunt Eleanor's voice was soft, pulling me from my thoughts. "Would you mind getting some water?" "For Mildred." I nodded, grateful for the small task. As I passed them, Henry looked up, his crayon hovering over a green T-Rex. He gave me a small, shy smile. Not a child who knew the weight of inheritance or the complexity of hidden lives, just a small boy. A small boy who was undeniably my grandfather's son, which meant he was my father's half-brother, my, what? Half-uncle? The labels felt absurd, yet undeniably real. In the kitchen, the remnants of the wake were being cleared away. Trays of untouched sandwiches, half-eaten cakes. Uncle Thomas hung up the phone, his shoulders slumping. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "The lawyers are going to have a field day," he said, but without malice. Elias had everything in order, or so we thought. No mention of Henry, of course. A trust for an unnamed beneficiary X that was supposed to be opened upon his death. "It's Henry." My stomach tightened. So, he knew he was going to tell us, eventually? Thomas ran a hand through his thinning hair. Or he had a contingency plan in case something happened to him before he could. Elias always had a plan, didn't he? Even for his secrets. He sighed. "Mildred is... she's a good woman, Mario. She's not after anything. She just wanted Henry to know his father's family." I poured the water, my mind reeling. A trust. A planned revelation. Grandpa Elias, ever the strategist, even in familial matters. It explained Mildred's quiet confidence, her lack of panic. She was executing a final request. When I returned, Mildred was speaking, her voice gentle. "Elias loved you all very much. He often spoke of you, Danny, Thomas, Eleanor. And you, Mario. He was so proud of you. Going into design?" She smiled faintly at me. "He talked about Henry a lot too, of course. He wanted him to be part of this family." My father, Danny, finally turned from the mantelpiece. He looked at Mildred, then at Henry, who had gone back to his coloring. "Why didn't he tell us?" His voice was raw, laced with the pain of betrayal, but also an underlying note of curiosity, even a dawning understanding. Mildred hesitated, her gaze distant. He was a private man, and he was older. He worried about how you'd react, about the disruption. He never meant for it to be a secret forever, just until the right moment. He believed in timing." She shrugged, a weary gesture. "And I respected his wishes. He was a good man, Elias. A loving father to Henry. He just compartmentalized things." Compartmentalized. That was Grandpa Elias. Always. His war stories, his business dealings, his quiet acts of charity. Who knew what other compartments he had? Aunt Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice still quiet but firm. "So Henry is... he's staying with Mildred, of course. But what about the family? What about us?" Mildred looked at her, her eyes earnest. "Henry needs family. Elias always said that. He wanted Henry to know his brothers, his sister, his nephew. He wanted him to be part of the Thorns." This was where the acceptance had truly begun to solidify. Not in a dramatic embrace, but in the quiet, unspoken agreement that a 4-year-old child, innocent and full of life, couldn't be blamed for the secrets of the dead. He was a piece of Grandpa Elias, a living legacy that none of us had anticipated. My father walked over to the sofa, sitting down beside Aunt Eleanor. He reached out and gently patted Henry's head. Henry looked up, blinked his big blue eyes and offered another shy smile. "Hi," he whispered, his voice tiny. Danny's face softened. The anger, the confusion, they seemed to drain away, replaced by a profound sadness and something else, something tender. "Hey there, slugger," he said, a faint echo of Grandpa Elias's own nickname for me when I was small. "What you drawing?" Henry held up the book. A T-Rex eating a carrot. A small, surprised laugh escaped Aunt Eleanor. Uncle Thomas, who had joined us, even managed a wry smile. The tension in the room lifted just a fraction, replaced by the faint hum of a new, unexpected reality settling in. Over the next few hours the conversation flowed, slowly, hesitantly. Mildred explained how Elias had met her, a chance encounter years ago. How their relationship had been private, discreet, a quiet corner of Elias's life that he had kept separate from the grand thorn tapestry. She spoke of his devotion to Henry, of his weekly visits, his quiet pride. It painted a picture of a man we thought we knew, layered with a complexity we had never imagined. "He worried about you all," Mildred reiterated, her gaze sweeping over us. "Especially about the inheritance. He didn't want Henry's arrival to cause strife. He wanted everyone cared for," and there it was. Grandpa Elias, in his final act, still trying to control the narrative, to protect his family even as he revealed a hidden truth. He hadn't been perfect, far from it, but his intentions, in their own convoluted way, had always been rooted in a deep, if sometimes misguided, love for his family. For all his family. I watched Henry, now happily showing Uncle Thomas his dinosaur collection. He was so small, so unaware of the upheaval he represented. He was neither a burden nor a curse, but simply a fact. A new branch on the old thorn tree. Later, as Mildred prepared to leave with Henry, a strange sense of calm had settled over the house. The initial shock had given way to a weary acceptance, tinged with a nascent curiosity about this new chapter. "We'll call tomorrow, Mildred," Danny said, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk about everything, about Henry. Your place in all this." He glanced at Henry, who was now clutching a small toy truck. "He's family." Mildred's eyes welled up slightly. "Thank you, Danny. Thank you all." Her voice was thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." As they walked out to the car, Henry waved, a small, trusting gesture. I waved back, feeling a profound shift within me. Grandpa Elias was gone, and his death had opened a door to a past we never knew existed, introducing us to a future we could never have predicted. It was messy, complicated, and undoubtedly would bring more challenges. But watching Henry's small figure disappear down the driveway, I knew one thing for sure. The Thorne family, fractured and grieving, had just expanded. And in its own strange Elias-esque way, it felt profoundly right. The old man, even in death, had managed to surprise us one last time, leaving behind not just a legacy, but a new, undeniable life to cherish.